Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marshall here at Stony Lane. So I wanted to talk to you because you are the kind of reader that has probably read lots and lots of books. You have a lot of books in your head, right? And the books that you're reading right now are kind of longer books, right? They're the kind of books that have lots of pages, lots of characters. The plot is probably a little more complicated, right? And so something that happens is that as you're reading your chapter books, you start to recognize things, right? There's things like themes or plots or character types that remind you of other books that are already in your head. Okay. And so if that happens to you and you're making a connection between one book that you're reading and another book that you've already read, like you want to use that so that you can read your book better, don't you? We're always trying to read our books better. And so I want to teach you a strategy that you can use to help you with that. Okay. So if you're making a connection between two texts, the first thing you do is you have to recognize that there's a connection. See what it is. Like something reminds me of something. And so just like know that, right? And name it. The second step is to think, write, or talk long about the first book, about the first one, the one you already read. Okay? You're going to think, right, talk long just about the old one. Okay? The one you know really well. You're going to talk or think or write about what you've recognized. Okay? And then the third thing you're going to do is you're now going to think, you're going to take this idea that you came up with in step 2 and use it in your new book. So use ideas in new book to read on, right? You don't want to just like be like, oh, that's just like another book. I'm going to read on. Like you have to really think, how is knowing that going to make reading this book better for you? How are you going to be smart in this second book? Okay, let me show you what I mean. So I am reading James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, right? And so I'm going to actually pretend that this is the first time I'm reading it because I want to show you how this strategy works. Okay, so now let's pretend I am reading in the beginning of this book, in the very beginning. So in this book, it's about a boy named James, and his parents died in a zoo accident. Some big rhinoceroses ate them. That can't really happen, but that's Roald Dahl, right? And so he lives with these two mean ants, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. Okay, and so he has to like work all day in the yard, and he can never play. He doesn't have any friends. He just has to work and work and work. Okay, so listen to this. I'm going to read you a part of this story about James, how he's working in the yard and he's really tired. Okay. And so now just listen. Okay. Poor James was still slaving away at the chopping block. The heat was terrible. He was sweating all over. His arm was aching. The chopper was a large, blunt thing, far too heavy for a small boy to use. And as he worked, James began thinking about all the other children in the world and what they might be doing at this moment. Some would be riding tricycles in their gardens. Some would be walking in cool woods and picking bunches of flowers. And all the little friends who he used to know would be down by the seaside playing in the wet sand and splashing around in the water. Great tears began oozing out of James's eyes and rolling down his cheeks. He stopped working and leaned against the chopping block, overwhelmed by his own unhappiness. "What's the matter with you?" Aunt Spiker screeched, glaring at him over the top of her steel spectacles. James began to cry. "Stop that immediately and get on with your work, you nasty little beast." Whoa! Nasty little beast. "Oh, Auntie Sponge," James cried out, "and Auntie Spiker, couldn't we all please, just for once, go down to the seaside on the bus? It isn't very far, and I feel hot and awful and lonely." "Why, you lazy, good-for-nothing brute," Aunt Spiker shouted. "Beat him!" cried Aunt Sponge. certainly will, Aunt Spiker snapped. She glared at James, and James looked back at her with large, frightened eyes. I shall beat you later on in the day, when I don't feel so hot, and now, get out of my sight, you disgusting little worm, and give me some peace. Ah, oh, terrible, right? Terrible. So now, let's look back at our strategy. First, I'm going to recognize what that reminds me of. Okay? So that reminds me of another book. And it happens to be another book written by the same author, by Roald Dahl. It's Matilda. Okay? Maybe you know Matilda, maybe you don't. Don't worry about it. Okay? But it reminds me a lot of Matilda. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to do step 2. I'm going to think, right, and talk long about Matilda. Because I know Matilda really well, right? And I'm going to use that to read James and the Giant Peach better. So, let's see. That reminds me in Matilda of Matilda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, right? So just like James and the Giant Peach, Matilda's parents they punish her. They punish Matilda unfairly. They stick her in front of a TV and like control her to stay there, right? They don't let her do what she loves. Like James really wants to go to the seaside. He wants to be with friends. She wants to read books, right? And they don't let Matilda read books, right? They don't let her do what she loves. That's a heart. What else? They also call her names. They call her names. Okay, what else? They treat her really badly. Like all this horrible stuff happens, but then as the story goes on, it kind of comes back to haunt them. Right? We know that. We know that Matilda's parents don't win. Matilda ends up winning, right? So that's making me think that James has all this unfair stuff going on. Because now I'm going to do step 3. I'm going to use the ideas in the new book. James is probably, since there's so many things under the sun up here, it makes me think that Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker are kind of like Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood. And in the end, they're not going to win either, right? They're not going to win. So I'm going to be looking for how James kind of outsmarts Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, or what other thing could happen, right? Because I know in books like this, the evil adult doesn't win. So what I'm going to be thinking about as I continue to read James and the Giant Peach is I'm going to be continuing to think about clues that show me how Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker are going to get it, right? Because they're not going to win. I'm sure they're not going to win. Okay, do you see what I did? Do you see how I followed these 3 steps? I recognized when there was a connection. I thought, wrote, talked long about the book that I already read. And then I used the ideas from the old book in the new book. About things to think about and things to wonder and things to look for. Okay? So that's something you can do whenever you have a connection between one text and another. Okay? Follow those steps and it will help you read your book better because you already have lots of books in your head. See if you can use that knowledge to read in a smarter way. Okay? All right, why don't you try that? And I'll see you next time.